Hello, people. This week I read High Financier by Niall Ferguson. This is a biography of Zygmunt Warburg. I'm going to say it like that the whole time because that's how they said it in the book. It's very cool. He's German. So the author now, not the author, the narrator, just as a side note before we sort of get too involved. The narrator does a great German English accent every time there's a quote from Siegmund. And these are usually at the beginning of chapters, but they're interspersed throughout as well. In, what is it? Our author got a hold of notes, letters, and such that are pertinent to the situation, so he'll pop a quote in there. Now, I know some people may not like that. It may bug some people, but it's not overdone. Everything's still clear to me. Also, I feel like, now I don't know, again, because I read the book. I listened to it. I didn't physically read it. So my guess is he may have italicized some of the quotes. And I think this is a good way to get across the visual cue from an italicized word when you're verbalizing it. So, that's how it comes across to me. So if italicized words bug you, then maybe this will. But otherwise, I don't think it's too big of a deal. Also, you will have some biographies that are more or less chronological. It makes sense. You're dealing with a person's life. It can follow nature in that sense. But our author chose more of like encapsulations. So this sort of section will deal with family. And years can go by here that will sometimes even reference future chapters. The Steel Wars we heard about multiple times on the way before we got an in-depth on what the Steel Wars were. And so he does that. And then the next chapter may be some early business, young life. And we follow these little capsules of this person. And it sounds odd. But as you read the book, I feel like it mirrors the actual human being, Siegmund himself, the Warburg gentleman, because he was an international banker, amongst other things. What does he say? He was a German scholar, an international banker, a British citizen, and a Jew. A lot of different facets to his life. But what he would also do is travel a lot. He'd headquarter himself in a place. It was Hamburg. Then it was England. He centered on England. And he would take trips. So he'd be as much in New York as Hamburg, as Switzerland, as England. And so in that sense, right, you have like a mini little life in England that people in America don't really know about. But you're around enough, not every day, but enough that people know you. But then you're also around enough in New York that they feel like you're New Yorker as well. He had this kind of an energy. And it was not just for when flights were available, because he was born 1906 or something to this effect, round about there. So some of these trips were on boat, ye old Titanic level, steam cruisers just going, which is still not a long trip, but it's not like by carriage. It's a little more involved, I say, than an air flight. But it was still doable. But he was big into it, and he traveled a lot. So I think our book ends up mimicking that. So by the end, you end up with it all sort of in your head. But as you're going, it can be a little odd. I say just a little. But, his life wasn't normal. Um, Now, I said he's an international banker. That's the bulk of what we zone in on. And our author makes a point at the very beginning of how unusual this type of biography is, but then how it shouldn't be. So, at the time of this recording, I think everyone watching this would have lived through probably Obama's Great Recession when he said, it's the greatest recession since the Great Depression. I think this followed along because he inherited it right after Bush, I believe. So that was too big to fail. The banking the hoo ha there, the brouhaha, as it were, and you can sort of see that from the outside and understand these banks, whether they're too big to fail or not, are so politically ingrained that they're going to flex before they fall, and it's going to affect governments. And that's just what happened. There's also been more recent, again, as of the time of this recording, wherein, now I'm mentioning presidents, I'm not getting political here until the book sort of does. You'll see what I mean. During Biden's term, President Biden, we had a sort of like a quiet upchucking in the banks. I don't know if anyone remembers this, but we had like 5 big banks closed in America. One huge one closed in California, and like everyone was worried about Silicon Valley. I think like two of the 3 big ones in Sweden shut down. It was sort of a big deal, but it ended up balancing out. But it's every time these things shake, you realize you're like, how much clout they actually have, these bankers. And it's been throughout history. You'll read about people conquering Babylon, and the first thing Cyrus the Great has to deal with is the bankers that show up and try and wheel and deal and push their weight around. So it's not new to human history, but it is hypercritical in a way that's not covered the way you'd think hypercritical should. And that's, I guess, no one's real fault. Even this book, as good as I think it is, I wouldn't recommend to everyone. It lacks sizzle, right? How do you get across a boardroom meeting that then later goes on to affect some kind of policy tangentially down the line? Also, some of these may not be publicly available. So if there was a massive argument, or if someone whispered something in someone's ear, Zygmunt Warburg didn't write that down. So our author can't exactly tell you this happened on this day because there's no record of it. We know he met with these people, but he didn't operate in that kind of sense. It's very, I would say, okay, if you go into the internet and type in conspiracy theory in banking, you'll get a lot of sizzle. Those are extrapolations of facts. The book is giving you those facts where you see that this person met with that company, and like 7 years later, this company does this massive thing. And if you want to jump to conclusions, you can say, well, this person's plotting all of this. And in a way they kind of are, and in a way they kind of aren't. But to parse that out, I think you need some amount of facts. And so that's where some of the enjoyment of this book comes from, is those facts that it's actually giving you. But don't be mistaken, for as low-key as it is, you do get a massive current of sort of power broker energy. But it doesn't have sizzle. Add to that, when we start talking some banking stuff, which he doesn't go into in depth, it's easy to get lost just because, I would say who watching this, who knows of the people who know YouTube exists, how many of them are like qualified to walk you through bonds and percentages and financial services and this kind of energy. Because if you don't know that sort of off the top of your head, you might lose bits. I'm just saying that going in. Again, he doesn't hammer it hard because I think he understands we're not going to get it anyway. But you do feel like if you if you knew a little bit more about what a bond is, etc., then this would be a lot more juicier, I guess. So that, be aware of this. Now he follows the Warburgs. I didn't know this. Apparently, at a certain point, everyone in a German town would take the town as their last name. So, which I'm like, yeah, it helps historians a lot. So he can be related to he can have the same name as other Warburgs, but they're not of the Warburgs, if that makes sense. I'm like, yeah, that helps everyone. Thank you, Germany. He was born in Germany, in Hamburg specifically, into a family of bankers, of Jewish bankers. I say Jewish because it is part of the story. So if you're born in 1904 or 6 and you're a Jew in Germany, I think we all understand what's coming for you through sort of history. It does come for him too. But we don't get there instantaneously. We get a backdrop on this family. We see that they have been sort of financial pillars since like the 1600s. This book is very good at, I guess, the horizon. I think that's how I would say it. So when you're in the carriage of history and you're rolling with Napoleon or Alexander the Great, you're right in the barrel of the action and how it's happening. You look out the window or you look to the side and there's the horizon. That horizon has an effect on these moments. But it's hard to find a way to consume that horizon. His life is sort of off the main trail of history, and it gives you a good sense of horizon. So, in this early part, you get a sense, and I say a sense because it is. There aren't hard, fast moments. But if you carry this with you, or, like I do, come in with a lot of the other history, right? You know a history of Prussia. You've read about Frederick the Great. You've watched all these war movies. Then it starts to fill that horizon in a really, really wonderful way. So you understand Prussianization, I think that's what they said. So at a point, way back in its history, Germany was just states. Hamburg, Berlin, Bohemia. They're little pockets of They're like 75 different kingdoms. And at some point, we get, who was it? Not Hindenburg. Bismarck. Bismarck unifies all of the German-speaking peoples into a new nation called Germany. It's not that old. And he was around the early part of that. And you get a great sense, again, tangentially, of, I say tangentially because this isn't the point of the story, but it's there to be enjoyed. You get this wonderful sense of how those Germans took that. So I'm an American, and our history is just colonies. So we're just out on our own, and then we build up, and we team up and help each other, and then we become a nation, right? They didn't have that. They had a long history of sort of being at odds or being independent. Then inclusion, and then what does it mean to put that on yourself, to put nationhood on yourself as sort of an adult? It's got to be a little bit trippy. It'd be like, well, what are we talking about? If Trump makes Greenland a state, you went from Greenland, part of the Netherlands or the Danish, whatever one owns them, to now you're an American now and you can travel to New York or How's that going to feel? I don't know. He goes through this. They really took it to heart. They really tried to be Prussian. That was what was in vogue, to be more militaristic, to enjoy the army, at least in public, and show to everyone else. In private, you're thinking of how the army might affect your business, whatever that business is. But in public, you would join a cavalry division. You'd be happy to join a militia. This kind of, I'm gonna try and train troops. You make it known that you're about it. His family was, what does our author say? His family was not unnormal in that sense. So they got in it with everyone else. And they had a great sense of this love for the fatherland. That's what they called it. So that's his family. We also get a sense, because I say Jewish. Now, your Germans from history will own a thing and dispense the thing. I say thing. It could be, let's say you're the king of Bohemia. When you die, your kingdom split between all three of your sons, and each of them gets this portion, and now they own three little kingdoms. If they want to unify, they can. If they don't, they typically don't. You just end up king of this little chunklet. So they ended up with, I don't know how many. Well, Jews are more, I guess, family orientated. And when you merge that family orientation with, I would say, a German industrious mindset, you sort of get like a super Jew. It sounds racist just me saying Jew this much, but I'm not a racist. So what they would do, his family specifically, the Rothschilds as well, is you plan it out. This father, which would be his grandfather, had 4 sons. 2 of them do what they want, and 2 of them end up in the banking business, and the third they send off to be a lawyer. And if there's daughters, then you marry the daughter to this person in politics, or I could make a better tie. They're decent dudes as well. I'm not just saying that he's slaving them out. But if she likes a guy who is big in the steel industry, and then that industry becomes a client of our bank, that's her brother's, and they use her other brother as their lawyer, the family's not going to be mad at that. This is the energy they kind of go with. And they don't just let it happen. They encourage it strongly sometimes, if need be. And that's what these Warburgs did. And they've done it since 1600 up until 1900 such and such. So they're not nobodies, but they're not also the top of the heap. I think the Rothschilds would be, because they carved up banking in Europe after Napoleon. So they got a bigger chunk. What's interesting here is, what's his name? Max Warburg, which is Siegmund Warburg's uncle. That is his father's brother. Moved his way up and in because they don't see any problem. They almost encourage a certain amount of being political, being in politics, to help the banker, to help the lawyer, to help the writer. However you want, whatever your profession is, they encourage a certain amount of politics. And so he maneuvered his way to be a financial advisor to Bismarck and the rest of the little unit there. He had the sense before the war, and I guess just through financials, which is cool, that he goes, the British have Irish unrest. The Russians have their own internal unrest. Probably I don't think they were Bolsheviks by then, but people were aware of sort of a common man rebellion that could affect countries, and Russia was bad off. He said, France was having trouble maintaining a 3-year military service on their men, as well as financial issues. So he encouraged Germany to just wait it out, to not actually get involved. But everyone else, and again, I say this because everyone else in the world was very eager for that war. And to have the foresight of not being in it is, I think, something that should be marked as to this man's intelligence. So we have the war. Again, another interesting moment is in sort of the sea change of that war. We talk about the Habsburgs, the Ottomans, the Romanovs, and the Hohenzollerns. These are prominent ruling families whose rule was shaken or completely upended and never to return because of World War I. It's not just so much that a king ended. It's, I guess, 700, 500 years of a king's rule, meaning this country functioned with a king for all of that time. I know Winston Churchill advised strongly that they not introduce a parliament to Germany after World War I. He's like, they aren't a peoples that would enjoy it or built for it. They're more built for their Kaiser, for their king. And that if they could put the Kaiser back in, then a lot of this could function a lot better. I remember reading that. So now when I'm watching this from a financial guy's point of view, I sort of see sort of what he was talking about, the ramifications. Because what we had is, what do they call it? The Weimar Republic. And he was advising them too. So we have now our Max Warburg, Siegmund's uncle, advising the Weimar Republic on how to deal with the crushing debt from ye old Vienna peace treaties. It's actually interesting. His idea, other people had it too, but he was a strong proponent of, I guess, fudging the definition of fulfillment. As he read the contract, fulfillment said, you make the attempt to pay these debts. So his thinking was, if we try to pay, are unable to pay, then we can go to them and say, look, we fulfilled it. Doesn't mean we had to pay all this exorbitant money. And at some point they'll go, fine, it's not doable. They'll rescind it. And then we can march on happily out from under that debt. I'm like, that seems like a great plan. But you don't have a king now who could have dealt with that plan, waited it out, and then moved up and through. What you have now is a republic. And what do republics do? I'm like, hey, we're not going to pay our debts. Well, then I can just start free spending like a mad dog, which is what they did. So instead of just sort of limping along, fixing what you can, and not worrying about this one debt, they went ham spending, and it tanked the value of the German dollar over here. So when you see the stories and other histories about wheelbarrows full of money these Germans were having to roll up to buy a loaf of bread, it starts to click in your head this new way. Like, oh, it might have been this banker's idea that this stupid Senate took and messed with in a stupid way. And I'm like, that sounds like some stupid senators to me. Republics function different than kings. And you're like, what you did is you've made the perfect bed for you-know-who. The Jew-hating Hitler himself. That's who comes next. Right into sort of a more grown-up Siegmund's life. I think he's like 30 or 40 now, right? Around about there. He's a grown dude now. So they give you his perspective. And again, more of this great, I guess, behind the scenes. nuance that just fills in wonderfully if you know a bunch of other history too. Because this Siegmund is extremely smart, very well read, on his own. He loves to read all the time, read the classics, and applies a lot of what he knows because he's kind of intense this way. And he's sort of a perfect model for what Germans were. So, you have a center for technology. They're technologically advanced. They're culturally advanced. How did a country like that come to be led by a Hitler and to do everything that ends up happening after the fact? That's always been sort of a big question when you look back. And part of it's their mentality. Part of it is that sort of fractured history they have. They're used to seeing sort of kingdoms rise essentially out of nothing, accepting that, living with it for 200 years, and then maybe it gets absorbed into another one or goes away. It's kind of a roller coaster. But Hamburg's always Hamburg. Berlin's always Berlin. He's just a new one of these, right? I can understand that from this perspective, which is what Siegmund thought. He was aware that this person did not like Jewish people. His friends around Hamburg they were raised with him. He was in all the clubs. He was high end. But they were like socially treating him a little different. But it's they could almost have an unwritten thing where they said, we're friends, but you understand the politics going on now. If I'm too nice to you, it might hurt my business. And he'd be like, yeah, I get it. And what he got in his mind, what he was thinking was, Hitler's just sort of saying this to get into power, to inspire the people. So in his mind, he says, if you scrape away the Jew hate, everything about Hitler I like. I like that he's strong, that he's charismatic, that he doesn't wait, that he's has the initiative to make a move happen, and that all of those things will help Germany move back up into the standing it should have. And we'll deal with the Jew hate later, I suppose, when things cool off. That was his thinking. Until, of course, he meets a certain I forget which official he meets with. But he sort of lays it out like, no, we're not joking. We actually hate Jewish people. It's no joke. And at that point, he, to his credit, once he sees the writing on the wall, he acts quickly. I think his wife wanted to move to Paris, but they ended up moving to England, where he ends up becoming a citizen. And in the time from when he's in England, which he stays in England through all of the air raids and all of the rest of the war, again, I got to give some credit to a dude, rich or not, if he has access to America. He had family that were bankers in America. He could have gone and moved to America and avoided all of that. He did decide to stay, so all credit to him for that. He stayed in England through all of the war, and then after the war, he just went right into his banking. But throughout, he would do what he could to try and hamper anyone trying to help the Nazi regime. So, at that time, I know Churchill was mad about this too, Sweden was just selling iron ore to the Nazis because they're buying and I'm selling. And they're not at war with me. I'm not helping anyone else, but I'm selling. So you can imagine, how people try and have some cancel culture today, how mad some of these cats were at Sweden. You're like, bro, you're giving them all the iron they need for their bullets, bro. Sweden's like, I don't want to hear it. I'm just making a sale. That's your business. So much so that Churchill was like, if I could bomb Sweden, I would. But of course you can't because they're neutral. So he behind the scenes now, this Siegmund, is doing business deals to try and hamper business in Sweden any way he can until this is sort of resolved. Very cool. It gets resolved, but he sort of stays in England. Then we sort of cut to the financials of it itself. And this is also interesting. it's its own little world, right? We I say we, you and me, and probably most people watching this video aren't billionaires born into banking firms. I mean, if you are, comment down below, tell me how accurate I am. But the whole sphere of them function in different ways, and you get to see that functioning in this book. I guess general schooling he had, but then he didn't. Siegmund didn't go get like an accounting degree or anything like this. He went to a bank in Sweden when he was younger, and worked in a bank for X amount of years. I think 4 or 5, maybe 6 years, just working in a bank. And that's how he essentially learned the business. This is what we do. This is how we do it. These are the things you can do in finance. So when he leaves there, Hitler, England, he starts to then get a hold of the reins of the family business. It was always going to be his or his brother's, but I think one of the brothers, that's a different family. He ends up with the reins of the business and wants to establish himself now in England. And here's some of the fun where you see, I guess, how a few men's vision, again, this is where the conspiracy theorists get it. A few men's vision can have these long arcing effects on history. Paul Warburg married a Loeb. I forget her name, Ashley Loeb or something like this. So it's Loeb, Warburg and Company. It's a massive bank back in the day in America. He was sort of the American wing of the Warburg family. This was Max's brother. So the uncle that Siegmund was friends with, that one's brother, was running this bank. He helped establish the Federal Reserve. I mean, come on. That's some of the big moves these cats can make. He was one of the first board members of the Federal Reserve. So we cut to Siegmund, and he has in his mind a Eurozone-ish. That was what his sort of life's work was to get not just Europe up off its feet after this war, but to use this, the moment from after the war on, to, everything's broke. If we're going to rebuild it, we can rebuild it the way we want. He was there to say, here's a good way we want it to be built. He didn't just leave it to happen naturally. He actually pushed in every way that he could this idea. Now, again, there's no one meeting where he locks up and says, we're making a Eurozone, everyone with me. But if he's hanging out with people who end up the Prime Minister of England and the President of America, et cetera, if you just hang out with these cats and you're talking to them and you're giving them your ideas, and later when they come to you for financial advice, you're explaining things to them this kind of way, you can see where influence has this world effect. That's what he sort of did. He on purpose didn't make what I would say is a normal bank. That is, I take in big deposits, I make loans, and I make interest off those loans. In his world, in the world of his cats, that was almost looked down upon. If you take deposits, you're just like a common banker. We're not common bankers. What he said he was a merchant banker. That is, when Chrysler or Ford or some other Jaguar industry has an issue, you come in and you consult and give them financial advice. You say, invest in this steel mill, this much money, blah, 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 and it'll work, blah, blah, blah. Right? And now you're connected to this steel mill. It does really good. Your steel's better. You went out against your competition because you had more raw materials to make more cars, to rims, to rubber, to whatever it is you're doing. Big industry jobs is what he likes to do. And he got deals like that. Those are big time deals. On top of this, I think to get clout, because he never wanted this monolithic kind of company. He wanted it small family compact. They said he invented the bond market in Europe. And I'm like, what is this? And through the course, I think I got a sense of what's going on. He would make a bond. It's just clear it through government, because I can talk to these cats. Like, let me sell this paper, this bond. And I say that I'm going to give you, if it's $100, I'm going to give you $100 plus 3% if you bring this bond back to me anytime after 2 years and say, give me my money. You're like, well, what's the point of that? I always wondered this, because I watched old movies and they're like, I have all these bonds. I'm like, well, who cares about a dumb bond? I don't want a bond. I want $1. Give me $1. I didn't get it. He said the main thing, it has to be anonymous and transferable. Meaning, I don't have to go show my ID. I just have to be in possession of the bond at the appointed time, and he will give me my $100 and 3% interest. We're not talking $100, mind you. You can do $1 million, and the interest on that's going to be a chunk of change. But he needed to, he was financially secure enough to cover that bond whenever it came in. So I now have a war-torn Europe that's rebuilding. People have seen, the Romanovs who were there for, I don't know how, 100, 200 years, just vanish. Or, which one was it? Yeah, the Romanovs. See all these great houses just vanish. You see Austria that used to be big, just gone. The Ottoman Empire is just gone. There's instability. And so these people in all these various European countries would go and say, I can turn all of my my family wealth, these gold bars that we've been having for, 100 years. I'm not super rich, but I have something. I'm on the way up. I can give you all my family wealth, and you can turn that into paper bonds. And now I have $500,000 in bonds that are just paper. I can shove them in a suitcase, go anywhere I need. And when I go to that place, I can explain to them, because I can say, if you give me $100,000 today, I'll give you these bonds. And in 2 years, it turns into $400,000 or whatever the markup would be. And that guy would be like, yeah, I've heard of that firm. I've heard of this newfangled thing. I'll take those bonds. Here's your money. And now he has just all these bonds. And as a criminal, I can function a lot better with bonds, or however it looks now. But I start to understand why these human beings would want these bonds. It was a new thing at that time when he did it. And it sort of exploded, put his company on the map as these financial wizards. But then he didn't even hardly bother with it. He just needed it to be big, famous, that it puts him on par with other people. What he actually wanted was those corporate jobs, the corporate advisories to say, do this with your money, because that paid way more. And he's like, everyone else is going to do bonds now, so I'm not going to be too far into that, because I don't want competition like that. I want to be above it. It was always this energy. But I thought it was just cool that, what kind of cat is this that can just invent this new financial thing and just go international with it? What kind of cat is this? And then, I wanted more, but again, more doesn't exist for a historian. I suppose if a good novelist grabbed a hold of this and a bunch of others, you can make believe, like if I had a TV show of this and you're showing me some of these backroom deals, I think that crap would be very interesting, with this as the roots of your storylines. The drama of every talk, of every conversation would be fun, but our historian can't give us that. He has to go on sort of facts. But he alludes with it in such a way that you sort of see the shape of the room. He then, what does he do then? What does he do next? They had been talking about this for like 7 chapters. And then we finally got to it. He did what they know as the Steel Wars. No, the Aluminium Wars. That's what it was. I don't know why I wrote steel. It's aluminium. He did what they call the first hostile takeover. That is, I bought shares enough to get a majority with the sole purpose of using my majority to edge out the people who were running it so that I can run it and make money with it or sell it or whatever. He was one of the first to do that. He was very sneaky about it. Again, at that time, he's in Britain, but he's not British. So Britain had a kind of an old boys gentleman's network. They all went to the same schools. They all grew up together. Their fathers grew up together, their grandfathers, etc. So they didn't have it in them or any want to actually go hard too much at their opponent. If he's big in aluminium, I'm just going to leave it to him. I'm going to go do something else. Well, you know what happens if you sort of lack competition. You get complacent. But you had a kind of, I guess, a small town feel in amongst the bankers and traders, as in, I'm trading stocks of the day, that, maybe this is something you wouldn't do. It'd be unpolite. It'd be uncivilized. He didn't ask. He didn't care. He just went and did it. And they gave him a lot of grief for it. But it sparked, once someone sees it and they're like, you can get big time with that. That looks fun. It sparked, and now everyone's doing it. Now everyone had to sort of be on more of an edge. There was this higher energy. And as we were talking about, as our author was talking about this, it had me thinking, because he mentions a part where he did the one hostile takeover, but he then used that, the same as he used the bond thing, as a financial service he could give to other companies. So if I run Doc Martin boots, he would go to Doc Martin would come to him and say, help me do hostile takeovers of my 3 biggest boot competitors. Once I own them, I don't have to compete against them. They'll be mine. I'll make that much more money. And he's like, very well, I can do this. I can show you how to make these moves. You look at the stocks this way, and you do this, and you do that. And of course, they give him a fat stack for it, because he's a high-end finance guy. He's giving you great advice. You follow that advice, you take over your competition. I say, well, what's the problem? The problem then comes into sort of a stagnant pool situation. If you don't have competition, then there's no reason for you to stop doing the bad business practices that may be inside of Doc Martin, the company. You've removed any incentive for him to stop sucking at his job. And so the suck just grows. This growth, this kind of, contagion, spread throughout England. And so you had, I think in the 60s or 70s, you had this economic turmoil in England. And I always wondered, I could see a glimpse into why it might have happened. Why, when things went so bad, they just fell off the map so hard. I'm sort of modern. So I'm used to the bad sort of tanks and the good ideas live, and then the good ideas get copied, and then good lives instead of bad. In England at that time, because of this Warburg, a little bit, right? Not exactly his fault, not his plan, but a little bit his fault. This balloon, this fake bubble built up in England. Then when the collapse happened, the bottom fell out of England. And it's very interesting for me to see this insight into it through this one particular person. Yeah, I just made that connection. I was just thinking, because I remember seeing old videos of England just all the crap, and I just never understood. I think this is how it happened. The back end of the book then is a little bit more into that financial world. Again, not here's the financial deals that I made, not this kind of nuance, but general sweeping. it was a lot of family drama with the corporations, the various banks being, I guess, the pivot points. So he's suing that uncle to not use the Warburg name, and then he's in his company, and it's can my son work here? We don't get along. Who's going to replace me? When do I retire? Very, very personal things. And you almost say, well, what do I care about personalities? But then you cut to himself specifically. And here you see how he functioned, and him being sort of your example as to how these high finance things can function. I think his son went to Harvard or some school like this. But he would say this a lot about the younger men who came into the company, in that they would do these just overblown, what he called overblown, in-depth financial paperwork thing, right? To show how this deal is going to function. And he'd sit there and he'd be like, I can't read this. What is all this crap? Who's going to read through all this financial crap? I don't know what the crap's going on. And then you're like, oh, right, he never went to like a finance school. He made a point almost. He said, don't go do factory tours. You'll just get dazzled. You don't know what you're looking at anyway. Don't bother with what they're doing. He barely bothered with the financials of it at all. He'd lean more into the psychology of it. And I think that's why he wanted a lot of face-to-face meetings. He'd go and he'd have a meeting with someone. And he'd try to do some psychology on how they acted, how they looked, how they presented themselves, as to whether he wanted to do business with them, to help them, to be a financial advisor to them, to, work over their numbers, whatever it is his thing did to make money. And he said what he did was, what do you call it? Personal banking versus, I guess, profit banking. I'm like, what are you talking about? He would, let's say it's Chrysler, and he's met Ted Chrysler, whoever the crap was in charge of Chrysler at the time. And I like Chrysler. So we're going to do business. I'm going to be on your side. To him, that meant you focus on that person. And when a steel situation happens and you get a good deal on steel, you call him first and you say, here's this steel thing you could get that would help you have the steel you need for your cars, and I can make it happen. But it's to help you. And I called you first. Now, if you don't want it, we don't buy it, and someone else buys it, and we move on. And sometimes they say, yes, let's buy it. And he'd get a commission or however that worked off of that. Now, when things went bad for Chrysler, he made a bad deal with someone else. He made a car model that didn't sell, or I had to do a big recall. Whatever happened, he said the relationship was more important than the profits, so that in his dire moment, you can come to him and say, look, things are going south for you. I can give you sort of a sweet, low-interest loan. I can help a government move money your way. I can do all these things. I'm here for you. I'm not going to make any money off this one. Don't worry about that. He said those connections, that's what he forged from New York to Japan to Tokyo, right? England, all over Europe. This is the type of relationship he would forge, where he focused on those people, good or bad. He was with them through good or bad. And that, again, he dies and a new wave takes over, the profit banking. And this is where you see the deal that can work and you work out what people to shove into that deal after you find the deal. Like this can work with this. I just need a car company. I have the steel mill. And you should go find a car company. You merge it and you walk away and you have all this money. And it seems vague, but then again, like I said, we have lived through some financial disasters. And you wonder if some of it's the mindset of modern bankers. This new mindset of profit over everything. This disconnectedness with the personalities involved. That if you sort of hung out with the person at the company, you'd understand, I think he's, drunk all the time. Maybe I don't invest half of the teachers' union's money into this company, and then we don't have this problem. To see this connection, this little subtle underneath connection, just in following this person through his day-to-day family drama. It's a real cool way, a real cool intro into this into this field. It also makes me highly interested in more books about finance, not to learn, but again, these people, the culture of it. I know, like, the Loeb and Warburg and company, he tried to save it for like 35 years. Could never save it. It ends up getting bought out by Lehman Brothers. And again, if you remember, in the banking crisis, just as Bush is leaving, I think it's just as Bush is leaving. I think it's Bush. It's Bush Obama, right? Just as Obama's getting in and all these banks are crumbling, I believe Lehman Brothers is one of the ones that goes down. Just evaporated. I think Merrill Lynch evaporated too. And other ones stayed. Goldman Sachs stayed alive. And I'm always like, and I know somebody on TV even asked somebody, who decided that Lehman Brothers dies, but Goldman Sachs lives? Which one's too big to fail? And I instantly was thinking of that when I read this part, because I'm wondering, did this guy have a kid? Or did one of his proteges have a kid that ended up big in the bank, that would be up in these financial meetings and remember, like, I never liked that you took over my family business or my friend's family's business. And so with all these chips, and I have to save 3 and there's 4 on the board, I'm going to let yours sink. That's a personal motivation. Almost petty. But here it happened. Here this bank is gone. People's savings, I know Bill O'Reilly lost a ton of money. He was sour about it. But it's a very personal thing that motivated. Now, I don't know that. I'm extrapolating. But I do wonder now at these people and their personalities and their friends and hanging out at parties, and how much this affects government policy. These people are in the room dealing with these governments, dealing with these dumb senators who don't know anything anyway. You wonder. We end on just one last sort of view at this Warburg, this Zygmunt Warburg. Our author says, and he mentions a lot, graphology. This was in the early 1900s or somewhere around there. The science of handwriting analysis. And that in America now, it's not held in the highest regard. I don't know about currently at this moment. I think it's making sort of a comeback. I think we have some handwriting analysis people who do good work. But at this time, Zygmunt was very much a believer in it. I know a lot of these sort of 18th century style cats liked new sciences. They like to grab onto new sciences. And so he, our author, sort of walks you through it. He makes you aware that the lady he worked with sort of could have read him a little bit to know what he wanted to hear. You can read in his writings that he would make excuses for when it failed or when it wasn't exactly good. That sometimes maybe it could glean some information on these people. But the point isn't, is it good or not? The point is, he himself strongly believed in it. So that he paid her for, I don't know how many years, 30, 40 years, sort of kept her in business. He would pay to do handwriting analysis of everyone who applied to work for him. He'd do handwriting analysis of various world leaders, other bankers, other people in other industries. He was constantly on the hunt for hidden psychological information, any kind of intel he could bring to bear before he made his decisions. He was very much about this. And I think it's just cool that handwriting analysis was one of his things. On top of reading a lot of psychology and trying to put that onto this person. And the author's like, it's not just, he kind of took it like, is this just like, a psychic medium or something? But they were very serious about it. When he went to do a lot of the work on this book, they made him take a handwriting analysis. And he was like, it was sort of scarily accurate to how I am. Take that how you will. He said that it sort of lost favor in America because companies were worried about being sued. Something about like privacy law or HIPAA or something. I'm like, yeah, it sounds like America. But it just is a window into the thing he put effort in. I mean, he didn't drop this lady at any point. He was constantly using her to do all kind of handwriting analysis. He was constantly looking for an edge for in the moment when he has face-to-face. But to him, the face-to-face was important. And I'm just imagining, I wouldn't have guessed that when high financial decisions are made, maybe the cats involved don't know as much about money as other cats at actual hard numbers, that they're just sort of going on gut. I don't know if that's comforting or not, but that it's a possibility is because it happened with this guy, and he was crucial to a lot of big decisions that were made in these 80s and 70s and 80s. It was kind of wild. Okay. That's more or less how it ends. It just sort of stops. The end just sort of comes. It's pretty. I don't mind when books do this, personally. Okay, that was the book for the week. These are your ads. These are my books. None of these books are on finance whatsoever. None of these are historical at all. I completely made up every bit of it. None of it's real. They're fun. I think. I have no idea. It's a too far in the woods to see the tree situation. But you can get them on Kindle, or you can read them through Kindle Unlimited. Either way helps. Or you can like, or you can subscribe, or you can comment. It's all up to you. We're good either way. I'll see you all next week.